The thunder roared outside as rain poured heavily against the large glass windows of La Lumiere, a restaurant known for its elegance and exquisite cuisine. The establishment was now enveloped in silence after hours, the only sounds being the ticking of the clock and the dim hum of a kitchen light casting faint shadows across the workspace. James Carter, clad in a simple navy blue security uniform, wiped the sweat off his brow as he stepped into the kitchen. It was the final stretch of his night shift. His job was straightforward: check the locks, ensure no intruders, and report any unusual occurrences. But tonight, as he walked past the marble countertops of the kitchen, he froze. Something was off. A faint glow from the kitchen light illuminated the central workstation, where everything was usually left meticulously clean and organized after hours. Yet now cooking tools were laid out as if ready for a performance. Gleaming knives, polished copper pans, and the mouth-watering aroma of melting butter filled the air. James felt his heartbeat quicken. Someone had been here. He slowed his steps, his shoes making soft clicking sounds on the tiled floor. As he approached the workstation, an unexpected sound made him halt: the light sizzle of hot oil and the metallic clatter of a pan. He turned toward the stove. Through the haze of steam, he saw a shadowed figure standing over a pan, intently flipping something. "Who are you?" James called out, his voice steady, though a knot of unease tightened in his chest. The man startled, spinning around. It was Alex Borden, the restaurant's head chef, but unlike his commanding presence during the day, Alex now looked almost sheepish, caught red-handed. "James, isn't it?" Alex said, his deep voice tinged with awkwardness as he hastily set the pan down. James nodded, his eyes fixed on the chef. "I didn't expect you to be here at this hour. The restaurant's closed." Alex gave a small chuckle, though it didn't quite mask his tension. "Just testing out a new recipe. Hope you don't mind." James didn't respond immediately. His eyes drifted to the pan. Inside was a piece of seared salmon, glistening with a lemon butter sauce. Something about the preparation struck a familiar chord. Before he could stop himself, he blurted out, "You're searing the salmon without crisping the skin first? The sauce will make it soggy." Alex paused, his expression shifting to one of surprise as he looked at James. "You know how to cook?" Regret hit James instantly. "Not much. Just learned a little," he stammered, his gaze shifting away as if afraid he'd overstepped. But instead of dismissing him, Alex raised an intrigued eyebrow. "If you've learned a little, then you'd know that to keep the skin crispy without burning it, you need to adjust the heat right when the skin starts turning golden brown," James interjected, his eyes lighting up as muscle memory brought the technique back to him. "But if you use a touch of olive oil instead of butter right at the start, it works better." The two stood in silence for a moment, the sound of rain tapping against the windows filling the room. Then without a word, Alex set the pan aside and pulled another filler from the fridge. "All right, James, show me. Prove your point." James's eyes widened, disbelief washing over him. "I'm just a security guard." "Yes, you are. And you just critiqued my cooking," Alex replied, his mouth curving into a sly grin that was part challenge, part encouragement. "So, show me. I don't have all night." James hesitated, his hands hovering over his uniform gloves. After a moment's pause, he removed them slowly, then picked up the copper pan and set it on the stove, the flame flaring to life. His hands trembled slightly as he grabbed a knife to prep the fish, but soon instinct took over. In minutes, the kitchen filled with the rich aroma of butter and fresh lemon. Alex stood motionless, observing James with a scrutinizing gaze. When James finally plated the dish, he stepped back, watching nervously as Alex picked up a fork and took a bite. "Not bad at all," Alex said after a moment, his eyes glinting with rare curiosity. "Why is someone like you working as a security guard instead of being in a kitchen?" James didn't answer immediately. The question tugged at buried memories he'd tried to forget. Lowering his gaze to his calloused hands, he said quietly, "I didn't think I'd get the chance. That part of my life, it's over." "You're wrong," Alex replied, his voice firm, his sharp eyes seeming to pierce through James's doubt. "Talent like yours shouldn't be buried. But first, you have to prove you have the determination to make it work. So James, do you want to try?" James lifted his head, hesitation, and a flicker of hope warring in his expression. This could be the moment that changed everything, or just another impossible dream. Standing in the dimly lit kitchen, time seemed to stand still as James gripped the edge of his uniform, his heart pounding. He wanted to say yes, to seize the opportunity Alex was offering, but a storm of past failures and regrets swirled inside him. "Prove that I'm determined?" James repeated softly, his voice heavy with emotion. He let out a bitter laugh, staring at his hands. "I used to be determined, but it never led to anything but disappointment." Alex studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Everyone faces disappointment, James. But it's how you push past it that counts." The challenge hung in the air, and for the first time in years, James felt a flicker of belief. Maybe, just maybe, this was his second chance. Alex didn't respond immediately. He stepped closer, his usually sharp eyes now softened. "You're not the first person to think you're not good enough. But if you truly believe you have nothing to lose, then why not try one more time?" James looked up, meeting Alex's gaze. It wasn't a look of pity, but of someone who had been through the same struggles. A strange feeling rose in James's chest. Not certainty, but a faint glimmer of hope, like a solitary light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. "All right," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll try." That night, Alex introduced James to a completely different world. A world where everything in the kitchen was an art form, from the way a pan was flipped to the precision of seasoning a dish. Alex didn't hold back, critiquing every small mistake James made, from the angle of his knife when cutting vegetables to the way he flavored his food. "If you chop onions like this, no one will want to eat your dish," Alex said, picking up an overly large piece of onion and tossing it into the trash. James bit his lip, swallowing the anger bubbling inside. But instead of arguing, he quietly started over. He understood that this wasn't just about cooking, it was about learning to accept failure and move forward. Hour by hour, the aroma of ingredients blended into the air, creating a warm and inviting atmosphere. Gradually, James began to rediscover the joy of experimenting and exploring new ways to combine flavors. By the end of the evening, Alex handed James a plate with a few simple ingredients: a fresh salmon fillet, a lemon, and some cilantro. "You've got an hour to create a dish that makes me want to eat it again," Alex said, his tone filled with challenge. James stared at the plate of ingredients, his mind racing through the recipes he'd once known. It had been so long since he'd felt the freedom to create. Running his fingers over the salmon, he felt the elasticity of the flesh, then closed his eyes to imagine the flavors he wanted to bring to life. When James started cooking, the world around him seemed to fade away. Each of his movements became more precise, more natural, as if his body remembered everything it had once been taught. The sizzle of searing salmon, the rich aroma of melted butter blending with fresh lemon, it all came together in a symphony of scent and sound. When the dish was finished, James set it down in front of Alex and waited. His heart pounded as Alex used his fork to cut a small piece and lift it to his mouth. Alex closed his eyes and chewed slowly. After a few moments of silence, he set the fork down and looked at James with a measured expression. "Not bad," he said, his voice calm, "but you've still got a long way to go." In the days that followed, James began showing up in the kitchen more frequently, mostly at night after the restaurant had closed. He quietly absorbed everything Alex taught him, from the finer details of seasoning to the art of plating. But this didn't escape the notice of Sarah Miller, the restaurant's notoriously sharp-tongued front-of-house manager. One evening, Sarah walked into the kitchen and found James using one of the restaurant's premium knives. Her voice cut through the air like the blade in his hand. "What do you think you're doing here, Carter? This isn't your playground to play chef." James turned, his voice steady. "I'm just trying to learn a little more after my shift." Sarah sneered. "Learn? You think you can become a chef just because Alex gave you a few compliments? Don't fool yourself. Your job is to be a security guard, nothing more." Her words were like a knife to James's pride. He clenched his fists, struggling to stay calm. In that moment, he realized the road he'd chosen wouldn't be easy. There would be many people like Sarah, people who didn't believe he belonged. Alex soon raised the stakes by giving James a bigger challenge, a trial service during dinner hours. James would have to prepare a dish for the entire kitchen staff, a real test to see if he had what it took. When James entered the bustling kitchen, all eyes turned toward him. Some were curious, while others, like Sarah, looked on with disdain. James took a deep breath, his gaze resolute. He knew this wasn't just about the dish. It was about proving he had the right to dream and fight for that dream. The atmosphere in the kitchen was electric as James stood at the center of the room, facing the other chefs. Alex, his piercing eyes surveying the scene, seemed to be awaiting a battle. Sarah stood with her arms crossed in the corner, her expression full of doubt and mockery. "James," Alex began, his voice calm but commanding. "Tonight, you'll prepare the main course for the team. No pressure, just to see if you're truly capable." Alex's understated tone did little to calm James's nerves. He could feel the weight of every stare, each person waiting for him to make a mistake so they'd have something to laugh at. Taking a deep breath, he nodded and stepped toward the prep station. James chose a roasted chicken dish with lemon and garlic sauce, a recipe that had been a favorite of his mother's. He vividly remembered how she used to make it in their small kitchen in Chicago. Even with limited ingredients, she always turned it into a feast brimming with love. As James pulled out the ingredients and began his prep, things didn't go smoothly. Interference from Sarah. Acting as the observer, Sarah inserted herself into the process. "Are you sure the skin isn't too thick? Or do you think home cooking standards will work here?" Her barbed remarks nearly threw James off. Deliberate sabotage. While prepping vegetables, a young chef, likely encouraged by Sarah, accidentally knocked over a container of spices near James's station, forcing him to pause and clean up. Quiet laughter rippled behind him, but James didn't turn around. He focused harder, pushing himself to ignore the distractions. When he checked the chicken in the oven, the sauce appeared overcooked, showing signs of thickening and burning. His heart sank. This could be a serious mistake. But instead of panicking, he remembered Alex's words. "Every mistake is an opportunity to fix something. Don't give up just because it isn't perfect the first time." James quickly mixed a fresh batch of sauce, adding some stock and fresh lemon to balance the flavors. The aroma began to fill the air, overpowering the noise and tension in the kitchen. When the dish was plated, James set it in front of Alex. The roasted chicken glistened with a golden brown, crispy skin, and the silky sauce dripped lightly over the tender meat. The vegetables were arranged meticulously around the chicken, each detail refined as if he had practiced this presentation thousands of times. Alex picked up the plate, cut a piece of chicken, dipped it into the sauce, and tasted it. The kitchen fell silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Alex's reaction. After a few seconds of silence, Alex looked up. "The flavor is excellent. The balance between the lemon and garlic is perfect. The chicken skin is crisp, and the meat remains moist. But," he paused, his eyes meeting James's, "the presentation needs more finesse. This dish doesn't quite make me say, 'Wow.'" James lowered his head slightly, feeling a twinge of disappointment. But Alex continued, "However, if this is your first attempt in a professional kitchen, I can confidently say you've done better than many people here." Those words were like a fresh breeze blowing through James's spirit. For a fleeting moment, he felt like he might truly have the potential to go further. Sarah, unwilling to accept defeat, spoke up, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "If this is better than many, then our standards must have dropped, don't you think?" Alex spun around sharply, his gaze as sharp as a blade. "Sarah, I think you should focus on your own work instead of standing here judging others." But Sarah didn't back down. "He's just a security guard, Alex. Do you really think he belongs here? Let's not forget, this restaurant isn't just about cooking, it's about class." Her words made the air in the kitchen heavier than ever. James stood still, his fists clenched. He knew he couldn't let his emotions take over, but her words struck straight at his pride. Alex stepped closer to Sarah, his voice low but commanding. "I don't care where he started. If he has the talent and determination, he deserves a chance as much as anyone else." Sarah remained silent, but her eyes were filled with anger and defiance. After the incident, Alex decided to give James an even bigger challenge. "You have 1 week to prepare a complete dish for the restaurant's trial dinner. If you succeed, I'll consider offering you an official apprenticeship. But if you fail, you should set aside this dream and focus on your security job." James knew this wasn't just a cooking challenge. It was a test of his courage, skill, and resolve. The kitchen shone brightly under fluorescent lights, but to James it felt like an arena where he was about to face the greatest challenge of his life. The restaurant's trial dinner was only 3 days away, and every eye was on him, not with anticipation, but with doubt. James stood at his station, the fresh ingredients carefully laid out on the counter. Yet his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Sarah's scornful words echoed in his head. "You're just a security guard. You don't belong here." His hands trembled slightly as he thought about the possibility of failure. But deep down, a small glimmer of hope burned brightly. He had to succeed, not just for himself, but for everything he had sacrificed. Alex entered the kitchen, his sharp gaze sweeping across the room. He walked over to James, placing a hand on his shoulder. "James, you have 3 days to prepare. This isn't just about your cooking skills, it's about showing your character. Are you ready?" James nodded, though his voice softened into what felt like a whisper to himself. "I'll do my best." "Doing your best isn't enough," Alex said, his eyes serious. "You have to succeed." Those words hit James like a punch to the gut. His heart raced, a mix of fear and excitement surging through him. The days leading up to the trial dinner were a whirlwind of emotions and relentless effort. James poured all his energy into the work, but the pressure wasn't just from the task itself. Unexpected challenges kept arising. Sabotage in the kitchen. A young chef, likely encouraged by Sarah, deliberately used up the herbs James needed for his sauce. When James discovered this, he was furious, tempted to confront the culprit. But he remembered his mother's advice, let your work speak for itself. He found a substitute ingredient, and in the process, created a new unique flavor. Sleepless nights, James spent countless hours in the kitchen, obsessively testing every aspect of his dish. He meticulously recorded every detail, from roasting temperatures to resting times for the chicken. His bruised hands and tired, dark-rimmed eyes were evidence of his tireless dedication. Family conflict. One late night, James received a call from his younger sister, Lisa. "James, you're neglecting us," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "I understand you love this job, but you need to remember that your family needs you too." The important day finally arrived. La Lumiere was adorned in grandeur, each crystal chandelier sparkling like tiny stars. The guest list was filled with New York's finest food connoisseurs, renowned culinary critics, and VIP diners. The air was thick with anticipation, but for James, every murmur and laugh felt like daggers piercing his mind. James stepped into the kitchen, his pristine white uniform freshly pressed, his hands clenched tightly, his breathing deliberate as he tried to steady himself. Alex stood beside him, his voice calm but resolute. "Remember, this isn't just about the dish. This is your chance to prove you belong here." James began preparing the main course, a French-style roasted lamb rack with red wine reduction and caramelized onion marmalade. Step by step, he recalled Alex's teachings. "Don't let the pressure consume you. You control the dish, not the other way around." The aroma of roasted lamb filled the kitchen, but not everything went as planned. While plating the dish, a plate of lamb slipped from James's hands and shattered on the floor. The sound of breaking porcelain brought the bustling kitchen to a halt. James felt his heart drop as if into a bottomless pit. From the corner, Sarah smirked. "I told you, he's not cut out for this." But Alex stepped forward, his gaze sharp. "James, don't waste time blaming yourself. Start again, now." Alex's words were like a slap, snapping James back to reality. He dove into his station, regaining his composure, and began again from scratch. Now there was no room for hesitation. All he had left was faith in himself. When the final dish was ready and placed before the diners, James felt like his entire body had gone numb from exhaustion. Alex led the guests to the table, where each person sampled the lamb rack. The room grew silent, the only sound the soft clinking of knives and forks against plates. One critic, notoriously hard to impress, lifted his head and spoke. "The sauce is flawless. The lamb is roasted to perfection. This dish has a distinct personality while maintaining a delicate refinement." James stood in the back of the kitchen, his heart lightened as if an enormous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Alex approached him, placing a rare, approving hand on his shoulder, and offered a rare smile. "You did it, James." Sarah stormed out of the kitchen, her expression icy and bitter. As for James, for the first time in years, he felt like he truly belonged. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of the New York kitchen. The fresh air carried the faint aroma of coffee from the employee lounge. James entered the restaurant feeling different. For the first time, he no longer felt like an outsider. The kitchen wasn't just a workplace. It was an arena where he had emerged victorious. Alex was waiting in the main kitchen, a paper in his hand. "James," he began, his tone firm, but with a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "You've exceeded my expectations, but this is just the beginning." James looked at the paper Alex held, an official apprenticeship contract with La Lumiere. His heart raced, a wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him, though he kept his composure. "Thank you, Alex," he said, his voice hoarse with sincerity. "I won't let you down." However, the road ahead was far from smooth. Outside the kitchen, skeptical eyes and whispers continued to shadow James. During an internal meeting, Sarah openly opposed James's inclusion in the kitchen. "We can't risk the reputation of this restaurant on someone without a professional background. One good dish isn't enough." Alex responded with an icy tone. "Sarah, I made the decision. If James doesn't perform well, the responsibility is mine. But if he succeeds, you'll have to reevaluate your prejudices." James overheard the argument from a distance, his stomach churning. He knew that to truly prove his worth, he couldn't just rely on Alex's support. He had to fight his own battles. As an apprentice, James faced challenges he had never imagined. Mistakes under pressure. James was assigned to prepare the sauces for an evening service. In a moment of distraction, he burned the first batch. Sarah wasted no time seizing the opportunity to criticize him. "This is why you shouldn't be here," she said coldly. James didn't react. Instead, he quietly cleaned up and started over, remembering his mother's advice. "No one is born perfect. Success comes from fixing your mistakes." This time he got it right. Conflict with peers. A young chef, Liam, showed open hostility toward James from the start. During prep for an appetizer course, Liam deliberately handed James the wrong recipe, nearly ruining the dish. Instead of retaliating, James fixed the mistake and approached Liam after the shift. "I don't want to be your enemy," James said. "If I'm wrong, show me. I'm here to learn." His sincerity gradually melted Liam's animosity. While James was finding his footing in the kitchen, his personal life grew more challenging. One evening, his sister Lisa called, her voice full of frustration. "James, you're spending too much time at the restaurant. You're forgetting that we still need you." James fell silent, guilt weighing heavily on him. But he also knew that if he gave up now, all his efforts would be for nothing. "Lisa, I understand, but I need to finish this. For me and for us." His words hung in the air, and though Lisa sighed in resignation, she softened. "Just don't forget about us, okay?" James promised himself he wouldn't. Yet he knew deep down that the path he had chosen demanded sacrifices, not just from him, but from those he loved. Lisa sighed, but eventually softened. "All right, just don't push yourself too hard. Family is still the most important thing." A few weeks later, James was assigned to create a new dish for La Lumiere's winter menu. This was his chance to prove himself to the entire team. He decided on a classic roast beef dish with red wine sauce, paired with caramelized winter vegetables. He didn't just want the dish to be delicious. He wanted it to tell a story, the story of his mother, who had inspired him through her simple yet heartfelt meals. James spent hours researching how to blend spices and control roasting temperatures to enhance the natural flavors of the beef. He experimented tirelessly, meticulously noting every adjustment he made. When James presented the dish, Alex cut a piece, tasted it, and remained silent for a few moments. "This is a dish that tells a story," Alex said, his voice lowering with emotion. "You've touched my heart, James." James's dish was added to the official menu, named Mom's Dinner, a tribute to the source of his inspiration. As James began solidifying his place in the kitchen, a significant event loomed: the New York Culinary Awards, where La Lumiere would compete against other top restaurants for the prestigious title of Restaurant of the Year. Alex decided to name James as one of the key contributors responsible for preparing the competition dish. This wasn't just a chance for James to prove himself to the world. It was also the biggest challenge of his career. Skepticism, internal conflicts, and the pressure of his personal life would all test his resolve and skill as he worked to solidify his place in the kitchen. The bright lights of New York glimmered on a cold evening. Inside the grand hall of the Metropolitan Culinary Center, hundreds of critics, renowned chefs, and VIP diners gathered. The space buzzed with the aroma of exquisite dishes, mingling with laughter and applause. La Lumiere, Alex's restaurant, was a finalist for the evening's most coveted award, Restaurant of the Year. Each competing team had to prepare a special dish that not only tasted exceptional, but also told a story, reflecting the soul of their restaurant. James stood in the prep kitchen, his mind swirling with anxiety. This wasn't just a moment for the restaurant. It was the moment that could define his career. Alex had unexpectedly chosen him to lead the preparation of La Lumiere's competition dish. Inside the competition kitchen, James commanded a small team of chefs, including Liam, now a trusted ally. But the tension was palpable. Sarah entered, her sharp eyes cutting through the air like knives. "James, I hope you don't think one good dish will save us. Failure here will destroy La Lumiere's reputation." James looked up, his eyes steady with determination. "If we fail, I'll take the blame. But I didn't come here to fail." Sarah smirked but said nothing more. James decided on a dish deeply meaningful to him and reflective of La Lumiere's ethos: honey-roasted chicken with red wine glaze and caramelized winter vegetables. It was a dish his mother had taught him, elevated with modern techniques and refined presentation. The roast chicken symbolized the warmth and love of family. The honey represented the sweetness of cherished memories, while the caramelized vegetables embodied simplicity and depth. James spent hours sourcing the best ingredients, from free-range chickens to hand-harvested honey. He carefully roasted the chicken to ensure crispy skin and tender meat, crafting the sauce to strike a perfect balance between sweetness and acidity. As James was plating the final dish, disaster struck. One of the assistant chefs accidentally spilled the backup sauce onto the floor, sending the team into a frenzy. "What do we do now?" Liam asked, his voice shaking. James took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I'll start over," he said without hesitation. But time was running out, and the weight of the moment bore down on the team. While others grew increasingly anxious, James focused intensely. He worked faster, yet with precision. Sweat streamed down his forehead, his hands trembled with fatigue, but he didn't stop. When the final dish was placed before the judges, James exhaled deeply, though his nerves remained taut. This was the moment that would determine everything. The judges sampled small bites of the dish. One of them, a notoriously difficult critic nicknamed the Destroyer, raised an eyebrow as if weighing his thoughts. The entire hall held its breath. Finally, the critic spoke. "This dish is not just delicious, it tells a story. Every element has been crafted with care, and the flavors evoke the comfort of family meals, yet with the sophistication of fine dining. I'm genuinely impressed." The words rang out like a victory bell. James felt his entire body relax, as if he'd just climbed a mountain and reached the summit. As the stage lights illuminated the room, the event host stepped to the podium. "And the award for Restaurant of the Year goes to La Lumiere." Thunderous applause erupted throughout the hall. James stood frozen, his eyes welling with tears, as he saw Alex smiling proudly from across the room. Alex walked over, placing a hand on James's shoulder. "You did it. This is our win, but it's also your win." Sarah stood in the shadows, speechless. Her eyes were a mix of anger and disappointment, but she could no longer deny James's talent. That night, James went home, picked up his phone, and called Lisa. "I did it, Lisa. We did it." On the other end, Lisa's voice was full of joy and pride. In the days following La Lumiere's victory at the New York Culinary Awards, the restaurant became the talk of the culinary world. Customers lined up outside, eager to taste the award-winning dishes crafted by the team. But for James, this was more than just a win. It was the beginning of a new journey. Alex called James into his office. James, he began, his voice serious yet more approachable than usual. You've proven yourself. I'm proud to have you on the team. James smiled but said nothing. Alex continued, but I know you have a bigger dream. I want you to consider this. He handed James an envelope, inside of which was a proposal, an opportunity to open a restaurant of his own under Alex's mentorship. James held the envelope, his hands trembling. I don't know what to say. Alex looked at him directly, his gaze unwavering. You don't need to say anything, just be ready. That's how you'll answer me. That night, James went home and sat down at the dinner table with Lisa and his younger brother. He placed the envelope on the table and told them everything. Lisa was silent for a moment before smiling. James, I'm so proud of you. But remember, no matter where you go, we're still a family. And I believe you can do this. Her words were like a shot of encouragement, fueling James's resolve. He knew that he wasn't just doing this for himself, but for his family and everyone who believed in him. A few months later, James and Alex officially opened their new restaurant, Hearth and Soul, in the neighborhood where James grew up in Chicago. The restaurant wasn't just a place to enjoy food. It became a symbol of unity and inspiration for the community. Hearth and Soul's design. The restaurant was designed to feel like a cozy home, with an open atmosphere and dishes that reflected a blend of traditional and modern cuisine. Giving back. James dedicated a portion of the profits to fund free cooking classes for children in the neighborhood, kids like him who had dreams but lacked opportunities. Hearth and Soul quickly became a renowned destination. But for James, success wasn't the end. He decided to take his journey further, sharing his story. James began writing a book about his journey, from being a security guard to becoming an award-winning chef. The book quickly became a source of inspiration for people struggling to pursue their own dreams. Alex's role. Alex continued as a mentor but handed over full management of the restaurant to James. You're ready to lead, he said confidently. One late night, as James locked up the restaurant, he noticed a boy around 12 years old standing outside the window peering in. The boy looked shy, but his eyes sparkled with curiosity. James opened the door and smiled. Want to come in and take a look? The boy hesitated but stepped inside. I want to learn to cook, but I don't think I'm good enough. James crouched down to meet the boy's eyes. You know, I used to think the same thing, but as long as you don't give up, anything is possible. He grabbed a small apron and tied it around the boy. All right, let's start with something simple. We're going to make toast. Laughter filled the kitchen as they worked, and James realized he wasn't just cooking. He was passing on a passion and belief to the next generation. James stepped outside and looked up at the star-filled sky. He thought about his journey, from scrubbing floors with buried dreams to standing under the lights of a restaurant he built with his own hands. This journey is just beginning, he said to himself. Surrounded by the twinkling city lights, James knew that no matter how challenging the road ahead might be, he was ready to face it all.